There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in a movie theater after 2 a.m. It's not just quiet, it's dead. The air feels recycled too many times, thick with the smell of stale popcorn oil, sugary syrup, and the sharp chemical tang of industrial bleach. I've been working the graveyard shift at the Grandview 12 off Route 27 for about 8 months now. It's not a glamorous job, but for a college dropout with insomnia and rent due on the first of the month, it works. My job is simple. Once the last credits roll and the teenagers stop making out in the back rows, I go in. I sweep the aisles, mop the sticky residue of spilled slushies, and check the bathrooms for anyone passed out. Usually, it's peaceful. There's a rhythm to the sweeping. Swish, step, swish. The repetition helps numb your brain. But then there's Theater 4. The Grandview is an older building, originally constructed in the late 92nd, and you can feel its age in the groaning pipes and the flickering fluorescent lights in the main hallway. But Theater 4 sits at the very end of the corridor, past the coming soon posters that are peeling at the corners. None of the other staff like cleaning Theater 4. My manager, Dave, claims it's because the HVAC unit above that specific auditorium is busted, making the room perpetually 10 degrees colder than the rest of the building. The girls at the concession stand say the acoustics are weird, that if you stand in the center, you can hear your own heartbeat echoing back at you. I never bought into the ghost stories. I'm a rational guy. I know that old buildings make noises and that isolation plays tricks on the mind. To me, Theater 4 was just another room with 200 seats to check and a floor that was always inexplicably stickier than the others. It was Tuesday, October 14th. A slow night. We'd been showing a marathon of vintage slasher flicks leading up to Halloween, so the place was a mess of candy wrappers and spilled soda. I checked my watch, 1:47 a.m. Dave was in the office counting the till, and the projectionist had already clocked out. I was effectively alone in a building designed to hold 2,000 people. I grabbed the heavy push broom and the trash bag, my headphones around my neck playing a podcast to drown out the building's settling groans. I finished Theater 3, dumped a bag full of popcorn buckets, and turned toward the end of the hall. The double doors to Theater 4 were closed. I always prop them open when I clean, but tonight they were shut tight. I felt a weird static charge prickle the hair on my arms as I reached for the handle. I told myself it was just the dry autumn air. I pushed the door open. The safety lights were on those dim amber strips that run along the floor, but the overhead cleaning lights were off. It was pitch black in the seating area. I sighed, reached for the wall switch, and flicked the main breakers on. The overhead tubes buzzed and flickered to life, washing the room in a harsh, clinical white glare. I took my first step inside, the rubber of my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. That's when the smell hit me. Not popcorn, not bleach. It smelled like wet wool and something metallic, like a handful of old pennies. I ignored it. I just wanted to finish my shift and go home. I gripped the broom and started walking up the far left aisle, intending to work my way down from the top. That was my routine. Start at the top, push everything down. I didn't look up at the seats until I reached the cross aisle halfway up. My eyes scanned the stadium seating, looking for the usual debris popcorn buckets left on armrests, cups balanced precariously on the floor. The rows rose steeply, a sea of red velvet upholstery that looked almost black under the harsh fluorescent buzzing overhead. Then I saw it. My heart did that stupid, stuttering jump against my ribs. Not out of terror, but from the sheer startle reflex of seeing something where nothing should be. In the very back row, row Z, sitting in seat 14, the aisle seat on the far right, was a person. I froze, gripping the broom handle so hard my knuckles turned white. It took a second for my brain to shift gears from cleaning mode to security mode. My first thought wasn't ghosts or demons. My first thought was, great, some teenager fell asleep during the credits, and now I have to deal with it. It happens sometimes. The late shows ended around 1 a.m., and if someone had a few too many beers or was just exhausted, they'd doze off. Usually, the ushers caught them. Tonight, they'd missed one. "Hey!" I called out. My voice cracked slightly, echoing uncomfortably off the bare walls. The acoustics in Theater 4 really were strange. The sound didn't travel right. It felt deadened, like shouting into a closet full of winter coats. The figure didn't move, not an inch. I squinted, trying to make out details from the cross aisle. It looked like a man. He was wearing something dark, maybe a hoodie or a heavy coat, and he was slumped slightly forward, staring straight ahead at the blank silver screen. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't shifting his weight. He was perfectly, unnaturally still. "Sir?" I yelled louder this time, putting on my authoritative staff voice. "The theater is closed. You need to leave." Still, nothing. No flinch, no head turn. I let out a frustrated breath and started climbing the stairs. The steps in Theater 4 are steep, and my boots made heavy, deliberate thuds on the carpet. Thud, thud, thud. I wanted him to hear me coming. I wanted him to wake up, look embarrassed, and shuffle out the exit so I could finish my job. As I climbed past row K, a thought nagged at me. The air was getting colder with every step. I know Dave said the HVAC was broken, but this was different. It wasn't just a draft. It was a localized drop in temperature, sharp and biting. By the time I reached row R, I could see my breath misting in the air in front of my face. I kept my eyes on him. He was big, broad shoulders that looked too wide for the standard theater seat. His head was bowed just enough that I couldn't see his face, only a mass of shadow where his features should be. "Sir, I'm not asking," I said, reaching row W. I was only 3 rows away now. "You can't be in here." I was close enough to see the texture of his coat. It looked wet, not damp, but sodden, heavy with moisture, and there was a smell coming off him, cutting through the bleach and popcorn. It was that metallic scent again, but stronger now, like rusted iron and stagnant water. I took the final steps up to row Z, ready to tap him on the shoulder and wake him up. I stood at the edge of row Z, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was close enough to touch him now. The figure was solid, undeniably solid. The heavy coat absorbed the overhead light, looking more like a black void than fabric. "Buddy, wake up," I said, my voice tight. I reached out with my left hand, intending to shake his shoulder. My fingers were inches away from the damp material of his coat. The cold up here was violent now, a physical weight that pressed against my chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. It felt less like a drafty room, and more like I was standing inside a walk-in freezer. My eyes watered from the sudden temperature drop. I blinked. Just a quick, involuntary spasm to clear the moisture. When my eyes opened, my hand was still extended, but there was nothing underneath it. I stumbled forward, my momentum carrying me into the empty space where the man had been sitting a split second ago. My hip checked the hard plastic armrest of seat 14, sending a sharp jolt of pain down my leg. "What the?" I scrambled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I spun around, scanning the theater. He had to be here. He had to be. There was only one exit aisle, and I was standing at the top of it. Unless he had vaulted over the railing, a 20-foot drop to the concrete floor below, there was nowhere he could have gone. "Is anyone there?" I shouted. The silence that answered me was absolute. The buzzing of the lights seemed to have stopped, or maybe my blood was rushing so loud in my ears that I just couldn't hear it anymore. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the grime on the floor, and looked under the seats. Maybe he slid down. Maybe he was hiding. Nothing. Just old gum wrappers and dust bunnies. I stood up, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I looked back at seat 14. The seat bottom was folded up, just like all the others in the row. If someone had been sitting there, and they stood up quickly, the spring mechanism would have made a noise. A clack. I hadn't heard a sound. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached out and touched the red velvet of the seat back. It was freezing. Not just cool to the touch, but ice cold, as if a block of dry ice had been resting against it for hours. The fabric felt stiff, almost brittle under my fingertips. I pulled my hand back, wiping it on my jeans. My brain immediately started doing gymnastics, desperately trying to find a rational explanation. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. You've been up for 19 hours. You're stressed about rent. You saw a shadow, a pile of coats, a trick of the light, and your tired brain filled in the rest. It was a hallucination. It had to be. I grabbed my broom, my hand shaking so badly the handle rattled against my belt buckle. I didn't finish sweeping the back row. I didn't even look back. I practically ran down the stairs, nearly slipping on a patch of spilled soda near row K, and burst through the double doors into the hallway. The warmth of the corridor hit me like a physical blow. The air out here felt normal, safe. I leaned against the wall, catching my breath, forcing my pulse to slow down. Get a grip, I thought. You're losing it. But as I walked toward the lobby to find Dave, I couldn't shake the feeling of that cold velvet on my fingertips. It felt too real to be a dream. I found Dave in the manager's office, a cramped, windowless box behind the concession stand that smelled intensely of stale coffee and hot electronics. He was hunched over the desk, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off his glasses, as he fed stacks of 1s and 5s into the mechanical bill counter. Whir click, whir click. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Trash out?" he asked, his voice rough from a pack-a-day habit. "Yeah," I said, lingering in the doorway. My hands were still trembling slightly, so I shoved them deep into my pockets. "Hey, Dave?" Weird question. The bill counter jammed. Dave sighed, smacked the side of the machine, and finally looked at me. "We're out of cleaning solution until Thursday, if that's what you're asking." "No, I think someone broke in, or maybe they hid in the bathroom after the last show." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hands stopped moving. He went very still. "Where?" "Theater 4, I said. "Back row. Row Z, seat 14. I went up to kick him out, but I don't know. Maybe my eyes are messing with me. When I got up there, he was gone. I think he might have ducked behind the seats. I expected Dave to grab his flashlight. I expected him to call the cops, or tell me to go check the emergency exits. I expected him to be annoyed that I hadn't caught the guy. Instead, Dave just took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted, not just tired from the shift, but deeply, spiritually drained. "You went up to row Z?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." Like I said, I thought it was a sleeper. Dave put his glasses back on and looked me dead in the eye. "Listen to me very carefully. You've been doing a good job here. You're reliable. I don't want to have to replace you." What? "Theater 4 has issues," Dave said, choosing his words with agonizing precision. "We've had technicians look at it. We've had security sweep it. It's an old building. Sometimes the acoustics play tricks. Sometimes the shadows settle wrong. Dave, I saw a guy. Solid as you or me." "I know," he said. And that was the scariest thing he could have said. He didn't deny it. He accepted it as a matter of fact, like a leaky roof or a jammed printer. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Here is the new rule for your shift. If you go into Theater 4 and you see someone sitting in the seats after close, especially in the back, you do not go up there. You do not speak to them. You do not ask them to leave. But you finish sweeping the lower section," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You keep your head down. And whatever you do not make eye contact. If you look at it, it notices you. If it notices you, it lingers." "It?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Dave, what are you talking about?" Dave turned back to his cash counter, restarting the machine. The loud whir click filled the small room again, signaling the end of the conversation. "Just clean the floor and get out, kid," he muttered, not looking at me again. "And keep the door propped open. Always keep the door open." I walked back out into the lobby, the noise of the machine fading behind me. The lobby lights were dimmed, casting long, skeletal shadows across the patterned carpet. I looked down the long hallway toward Theater 4. The double doors were shut tight again. I hadn't touched them. I didn't quit. I needed the money too badly, and honestly, in the harsh light of day, the conversation with Dave felt surreal. Like a prank. I convinced myself he was hazing the new guy, trying to see if I'd crack. By the time my shift started on Thursday night, I had almost rationalized the whole thing away. Almost. The night was busy. A premiere for a new superhero movie meant sold-out shows, and a lobby that looked like a bomb had gone off in a candy factory. I spent most of the night running back and forth with trash bags, sweating through my uniform. It was distracting. Good. I didn't want time to think. But eventually, the clock hit 2 a.m. The last patrons filtered out, chatting about post-credit scenes. The lobby music cut off. The silence settled in. I left Theater 4 for last. I stood outside the double doors for a solid minute, clutching the broom handle. My palms were sweating. "Just a job," I whispered. "Just a room. Just a prank." I kicked the wooden doorstop under the left door, wedging it open so hard the rubber scraped a black mark on the linoleum. Dave said to keep it open. I wasn't taking chances. I flipped the breakers. The lights hummed on. I walked in, keeping my eyes strictly on the floor. I focused on the red swirls of the carpet, the crushed kernels of popcorn, the sticky patches of soda. Look down. Sweep. Move on. I started at the front, near the screen, working my way backward. It was working. I was 5 minutes in, my heart rate settling. When I reached the cross aisle that separates the lower stadium seating from the upper deck, I shouldn't have looked up. I knew the rule, don't make eye contact. But it's human nature. If you're told not to look at the pink elephant, it's all you can think about. As I turned to dump a dustpan into my trash bag, my eyes flicked upward. Just a glance. My blood ran cold. He was there. But he wasn't in row Z anymore. He was in row T, 6 rows closer. I dropped the dustpan. The plastic clatter sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. The figure hadn't moved when I dropped it. It sat in the exact same posture as before, slumped forward, heavy, motionless. But now that he was closer, I could see details I missed on Tuesday. It wasn't a hoodie. It was long, dark hair. It hung down over the face in wet, ropey strands, clinging to the shoulders of a dark coat that looked sodden and heavy. The dampness seemed to radiate outward. The red velvet of the seat he was occupying was stained a darker crimson, as if the moisture was seeping into the fabric. My breath hitched. I stood frozen in the cross aisle, gripping the broom like a weapon. The distance between us was maybe 30 feet now. "Don't look at it," Dave's voice echoed in my head. I forced my head down. I stared at my shoes. I could feel the presence of the thing above me. It felt like a pressure on the top of my skull, a magnetic pull trying to drag my eyes back up to row T. The silence in the room changed. The background hum of the HVAC seemed to drop away, replaced by a low, rhythmic sound. At first, I thought it was a drip. Plip, plip, plip. It was coming from row T. Whatever that thing was, it was dripping onto the floor. I turned my back to it. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to sprint out the door and never come back. But fear has a strange way of locking you in place. I felt like if I ran, I would trigger a chase response, like running from a bear. So I swept. I swept the cross aisle with frantic, jerky movements, my back to the figure. My neck prickled, the tiny hairs standing on end. I could feel eyes on me, not human eyes. Something heavy and hateful. I didn't finish the upper section. I swept the pile of trash into the bag, grabbed my gear, and walked. Didn't run, walked toward the exit. I looked back over my shoulder. The seat in row T was empty, but the seat bottom was folded down. Saturday, October 18th, 2:15 a.m. I brought a doorstop from home, a heavy rubber wedge I used for my apartment door. I wasn't trusting the wooden one anymore. I kicked it under the Theater 4 door with enough force to bruise my heel, ensuring the exit wouldn't swing shut on me. I had a plan. I would clean the front 3 rows, the neckbreaker seats that nobody ever sat in, and then I would leave. I'd tell Dave the rest of the theater was clean. I didn't care if I got fired for doing a half-assed job. I just couldn't be in that room for longer than 5 minutes. I kept my head down, chin to chest, eyes on the sticky soda-stained floor. The first 2 minutes were fine, just the swish-swish of my broom and the hum of the air conditioner. I was actually starting to relax, thinking maybe the haunting, or whatever it was, had been a temporary fluke. Then the smell hit me. It didn't drift in slowly. It assaulted me. 1 second, the air smelled like stale popcorn. The next, it was thick with a stench, so acrid I gagged, dropping the broom. It smelled like burning plastic and chemicals, specifically that sharp, vinegar-like scent of old film stock catching fire, burning celluloid. But underneath that, layered heavily like rot beneath a floorboard, was the smell of copper. It tasted like I had bitten my tongue, and my mouth was full of blood. I pulled my shirt collar up over my nose, coughing. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice sounding small and muffled in the vast room. The air pressure dropped. My ears popped, painfully, like I was descending in an airplane. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The background hum of the building vanished completely. Then, the sound started. It came from behind me, from the upper rows. Tap. Pause. Tap. It wasn't a mechanical noise. It wasn't a settling pipe. It sounded wet. It sounded like a soggy finger drumming against a hard plastic armrest. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, and mocking. Tap. 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 I was standing in row B. The sound was coming from somewhere near the middle, maybe row M. My body screamed at me to run. My legs felt like they were submerged in concrete. The air around me had thickened, becoming viscous and cold. It felt like walking through invisible water. Every movement was a struggle. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look, don't look, don't look. The tapping got louder, faster, tap, 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 tap. And then a sound that nearly made my knees buckle, the distinct, creaking groan of a theater seat spring compressing. Someone had just shifted their weight. Right behind me. Not in the upper rows. It sounded like it was in row C, directly behind where I was standing. The smell of burning film was so strong now, my eyes were watering. Tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from the chemical burn in the air. I could feel the cold radiating off the person behind me, a freezer burn cold that pierced right through my uniform polo. I gripped the handle of my broom, my knuckles white. I had two choices: run blindly and risk tripping, or turn around and face whatever was sitting there. The tapping stopped. A long, rattling breath filled the silence. It sounded wet, like air bubbling through fluid in a lung. I couldn't breathe. The wet, rattling sound behind me was so close. I could practically feel the moisture hitting the back of my neck. Then, the overhead lights surged. It wasn't a flicker. It was a violent, audible ZZZKT of electricity that made the bulbs flare blindingly bright for a fraction of a second, before settling back to their normal hum. The sudden shift in light intensity broke my paralysis. I spun around, swinging the broom handle like a baseball bat, screaming something unintelligible, a mix of get back and a sheer primal noise of panic. The broom swished through empty air. Row C was empty. I stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping into my eyes, scanning the seats. No dark figure, no wet coat, no ropey hair. The oppressive weight in the air had lifted the moment the lights surged. The smell of burning film was gone, replaced instantly by the familiar scent of stale popcorn and bleach. "I'm losing my mind," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I am actually losing my mind." I lowered the broom, wiping my forehead with the back of my hand. I needed to leave. I needed to clock out, go home, and sleep for 20 hours. But as I turned to head for the exit, a movement caught my eye. Row C, seat 8. Directly behind where I had been standing, the seat bottom was slowly, agonizingly folding up. Creak. It moved as if someone had just stood up, and the spring was struggling against rust and gravity to return to its upright position. I stared at it. The red velvet of that specific seat was dark, soaked. I shouldn't have approached it. I should have run. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and my brain was desperately looking for a physical cause, a leaking pipe, a spilled jumbo soda, anything to explain the wet sound I had heard. I stepped into row C. The floor was dry, but the seat, the fabric wasn't just wet, it was saturated. A dark, viscous liquid oozed from the cushion, dripping onto the concrete floor. It looked like water, but it was thicker, slightly slimy to the touch. And resting in the middle of that puddle, stuck to the sodden velvet, was a scrap of paper. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and peeled it off the seat. It was cold and slimy, threatening to disintegrate in my grip. I held it up to the fluorescent light. It was a ticket stub. The old kind, heavy cardstock, not the thermal paper receipts we use now. The red ink was faded and bled out from the moisture, but I could still read the blocky, dot matrix printing. Grandview Cinemas Admit 1. Adult Theater 4 date. Nov 1, 21999 time. 11:45 p.m. I stared at the date, my brain trying to process the math. That was over 25 years ago. The ticket wasn't just old, it smelled ancient. It smelled like wet earth and mold, like something that had been buried in a basement after a flood. I looked at the seat again. The dark stain was spreading, soaking into the adjacent armrests. A sudden, sharp realization hit me. The Grandview 12 didn't open until 2001. I remembered reading the plaque in the lobby during my orientation. If this ticket was from 1999, it wasn't from this theater. Or at least, not the theater as it existed now. I shoved the damp stub into my pocket, grabbed my supplies, and backed out of the room, keeping my eyes fixed on row C until the door latched shut behind me. I didn't clean the rest of the room. I didn't care. I had physical proof in my pocket that I wasn't crazy. But as I walked down the hall, the dampness from the ticket seeped through my jeans, feeling cold against my thigh, like a dead finger pressing against my skin. The storm hit on Tuesday, November 2nd. It wasn't just a snowstorm. It was a full-blown nor'easter. that buried the state under 2 feet of heavy, wet, concrete-like snow. The roads were treacherous, the power grid was flickering, and the entire world outside the glass doors of the Grandview 12 had turned into a swirling white void. Common sense said we should have closed early. Corporate said stay open until the last show ended. My coworker, a high school kid named Tyler, who usually handled the upstairs theaters, called out at 6 p.m. His mom wouldn't let him drive in the snow. Smart kid. That left me. Just me. By 1 a.m., the theater was a ghost town. The last few brave souls had skidded out of the parking lot hours ago. It was just me and Dave. I need you to do a full sweep, Dave said, not looking up from his paperwork. He was stressed, phone glued to his ear, arguing with the district manager about salt deliveries. I'm going to be in the back office dealing with this. Don't disturb me unless the building is on fire. Dave? I started, clutching my mop bucket. Theater 4. I can't go in there alone. Dave finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. The inspection is tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If that room isn't clean, we both get written up. Just get it done, fast. He slammed the office door. The lock clicked. I was alone. Truly alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass panes of the lobby doors, a high-pitched whistling sound that echoed through the empty concession stand. The isolation felt physical, a heavy blanket wrapping around my lungs. I dragged the trash bin down the long, dim hallway. The lights were flickering due to the storm, pulsing in a sickly, uneven rhythm. Buzz, dim, buzz, bright. I reached Theater 4. The door I had propped open last time was closed. I hesitated, hand hovering over the metal push bar. The metal was freezing cold, sucking the heat right out of my palm. It's just a room, I lied to myself. It's just a room. I pushed the door open. I didn't even have to turn on the cleaning lights to know I wasn't alone. The emergency aisle lighting cast long, eerie shadows across the floor, but the screen itself was glowing. Not with a movie, but with a faint, static luminescence, like the projector was on but blocked. And there he was. He wasn't in the back anymore. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was in row K, seat 12, dead center. The perfect seat, the spot where audio engineers calibrate the sound. I froze in the doorway, the trash bin bumping against my heels. The figure sat perfectly upright now, no more slumping. His posture was rigid, attentive. The darkness of the theater seemed to bend around him, pulling the meager light into his silhouette. The silence in the room was absolute. The howling wind outside didn't exist in here. The only sound was my own jagged breathing and the blood rushing in my ears. I watched, paralyzed, as a drop of water fell from the ceiling, or maybe from him, and hit the back of the seat in front of him. Splats. In the pale glow of the screen, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The floor around row K wasn't just damp, it was flooded. A pool of black, stagnant water had gathered around his feet, reflecting the static light of the screen like a dark mirror. And then, slowly, mechanically, the head of the figure began to turn. Not toward the screen, toward the door, toward me. I wanted to scream, but my throat had seized up. It felt like I had swallowed a handful of dry ice. I watched, paralyzed, as the figure's head finished its slow, grinding rotation. There was no face. Where the features should have been, there was only a slick, dark surface. It looked like someone had taken a heavy oil painting of a human face and smeared it while the paint was still wet. Just a blurred, unrecognizable mesh of gray and black tones where eyes and a mouth should be. Then, it stood up. It didn't push off the armrests. It didn't shift its weight to its feet. It simply occurred. 1 second, it was sitting. In the literal next frame of reality, it was standing fully upright in the aisle. There was no transition. It was a jump cut, a glitch in the world itself. My brain couldn't process it. The movement violated every law of physics I knew. It was like watching a film reel that was missing 4 or 5 frames of action. The figure took a step toward the stairs. Again, the motion was wrong. One moment its leg was lifted. The next, its foot was planted 3 feet forward. It moved in staccato bursts, jerking forward with a terrifying mechanical speed that contrasted with the stillness of the room. Snap. It was at the end of row K. Snap. It was at the bottom of the stairs. Snap. It was starting to climb toward me. It wasn't walking. It was editing itself closer. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the rubber doorstop I had kicked into place. I scrambled to grab the door handle, desperate to get into the hallway, to get to Dave, to get anywhere but here. Click. Whir. The sound erupted from directly above and behind my head, a deafening mechanical roar that vibrated through the floorboards. The projection booth. A split second later, a beam of blinding, pure white light exploded from the booth window above me. It cut through the darkness of the theater like a physical solid, illuminating the millions of dust motes dancing in the air. The beam hit the screen, turning the entire room into a wash of reflected brilliance. But the light also hit the figure climbing the stairs. Backlit by the reflection from the screen and illuminated from behind by the projector, the figure stopped. It stood in the center of the aisle, maybe 15 rows down. The light didn't pass through it. It didn't bounce off it. The figure seemed to swallow the light, creating a hole in the beam, a silhouette of absolute void-like darkness. The smell of burning celluloid returned, instantly and violently. So strong I could taste the chemical scorch on the back of my tongue. The air temperature plummeted, shattering past freezing. The water pooling on the floor around the figure's feet began to hiss, turning into a low, creeping mist. Then, the figure looked up, not at me, at the booth window above me, and then it vanished. It didn't fade. It didn't walk away. It simply ceased to exist in that spot. I blinked, the afterimage of the bright light burning in my retinas. Thud. The sound came from the floor right in front of me. I looked down. He was standing on the landing, 3 feet away. The jump cut had brought him from the middle of the stairs to directly in my face in a fraction of a second. I flinched, throwing my arms up to protect my face, waiting for the impact, waiting for cold hands to grab me. But nothing happened. The air shimmered where the figure had been standing, like heat haze rising off asphalt, and then it was gone. Just like that. The space in front of me was empty again. The only thing remaining was the overwhelming scent of ozone, and the violent, blinding light of the projector hitting the screen behind me. I spun around, desperate to find the door handle, my breath tearing out of my throat in ragged gasps. My hands scrambled against the wall, but I couldn't find the push bar. I was disoriented, the afterimages of the bright light pulsing in my vision. Then, the light in the room changed. The blinding white glare from the screen dimmed, shifting into a flickering, grainy gray. The sound of the projector changed pitch, deepening from a steady hum to a grinding, wet mechanical noise, like bones being crushed in a grinder. I froze. I turned slowly to look at the screen. It wasn't playing a movie. It wasn't static. It was a live feed. The image was high contrast, black and white, shot from a high angle, likely from the very top of the vaulted ceiling, near the projection booth ports. It was a wide shot of Theater 4. I saw the rows of empty seats, looking like jagged teeth in the grayscale footage. I saw the spill of popcorn on the aisle floor, and I saw a person standing near the exit doors, looking up at the screen. It was me. I was watching myself in real time. I saw the back of my uniform polo, the way my shoulders were hunched in terror, the mop bucket overturned near my feet. The delay was non-existent. When I raised my trembling hand to my mouth, the figure on the screen did the exact same thing instantly. But I wasn't alone in the shot. On the screen, emerging from the shadows of the projection booth window directly above my head, was something else. It wasn't the man in the coat. It was something. Longer. It looked like a human spine that had been stretched to impossible lengths, draped in tattered, wet rags. It was hanging upside down from the booth window, descending like a spider on a thread of silk. Its limbs were multi-jointed, snapping and unfolding silently as it lowered itself toward me. I stared at the screen, my brain refusing to comprehend the geometry of the creature. It was huge, pale, and glistening in the camera feed. On the massive screen, I watched as the thing's head, an inverted, hairless dome with hollow pits for eyes, hovered inches above my own head. I felt a single freezing drop of water land on my scalp. I didn't look up. I didn't dare look up. I just watched the screen, paralyzed with a primal, animalistic terror, as the thing on the screen slowly reached out a hand that consisted of too many fingers. It hovered its claws right next to my ear, and then, on the screen, I saw its mouth open. It was impossibly wide. At the exact same moment, I felt a puff of breath cold as the grave, and smelling of ancient, rotting water blow directly into my right ear. "Run," it whispered. That single syllable, "run," broke the spell. It wasn't a warning. It was a head start. I didn't think. I threw my entire body weight against the double doors, slamming my shoulder into the wood. I expected them to swing open, to send me tumbling out into the safety of the hallway. They didn't budge. It felt like hitting a solid concrete wall. The push bar, which I had just used minutes ago, was immovable. I looked down at the floor. The heavy rubber doorstop I had kicked into place was gone. Not moved, gone. There was a scorched black mark on the linoleum where it had been, as if the rubber had been vaporized by intense heat. "Help! Dave! Open the door!" I screamed, pounding on the wood until my fists bruised. Behind me, the theater erupted. It started at the front, near the screen. Wham. The sound was like a gunshot. The seat bottom of the very first seat in row A slammed down. Wham, wham, wham. It was a wave. A domino effect of mechanical violence. The seats were slamming down, row by row, surging up the stadium, seating toward me. It sounded like a freight train derailing, a cacophony of metal springs and heavy plastic colliding. I spun around, my back pressed against the locked doors. The screen was still glowing with that sick, gray live feed. On it, I saw myself trapped against the door. I saw the thing from the ceiling fully detach itself. It dropped to the floor in the center aisle with a wet, heavy slap. It began to scramble up the stairs. It moved like a spider, limbs flailing and snapping at impossible angles, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Wham, wham, wham. The wave of slamming seats was catching up to it, racing it to the top row where I stood. I had nowhere to go. The main exit was sealed. The emergency exits were at the bottom of the screen behind the creature. Then I saw it. The projectionist access door. It was a small, unmarked metal door in the corner of the back wall, about 10 feet to my left. It was rarely used, mostly for technicians to bypass the lobby, but it led directly into the booth stairwell. I pushed off the main doors and sprinted. My boots slipped on the wet carpet. The water was everywhere now, soaking through my soles. I scrambled on hands and knees, clawing at the floor to regain traction. Row W slammed down. Row X. The noise was deafening, vibrating in my teeth. The creature in the aisle hissed a sound like high-pressure steam escaping a vent and lunged. I threw myself at the small metal door. It was locked. No, no, no! I shrieked, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped them. They clattered onto the wet floor. The wave of noise was at row Y, 1 row away. The creature was at the top of the stairs, its pale, featureless face lunging toward my ankle. I didn't pick up the keys. I stepped back and kicked the handle. I put every ounce of adrenaline, terror, and hysterical strength I had into that kick. The cheap lock mechanism of the 90 seconds era door shattered. The door flew inward. I dove through the opening, landing hard on the metal grating of the stairwell. I kicked the door shut with my heel just as row Z slammed down. Crack! Something hit the door from the other side the instant it latched. The metal buckled inward, leaving a dent the shape of a fist or a claw right next to my head. I didn't wait to see if it would hold. I scrambled up the narrow spiral stairs to the booth, lungs burning, tears streaming down my face, listening to the creature screeching and scratching against the metal below. I spent the next 5 hours curled up in the corner of the projection booth, clutching a heavy pipe wrench I found under the rewinding table. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I just stared at the heavy steel door of the booth, listening. For the first hour, there were sounds. Wet, slapping footsteps on the metal stairs. The sound of long fingernails dragging slowly down the other side of the door. A soft, gurgling weeping that sounded like it was coming from inside the ventilation shafts. But when the sun started to bleed through the small porthole window at 6:45 a.m., everything stopped. The oppressive heaviness in the air lifted like a breaking fever. I didn't come out until the police kicked the door in at 7:30 a.m. Dave had called them, not because he was worried about me, but because the alarm system had tripped when I kicked the access door in. They found me shivering, dehydrated, and holding the wrench so tight they had to pry my fingers open one by one. I told them everything. The intruder, the water, the seat slamming, the thing on the ceiling. The officers looked at each other, then at Dave. Dave didn't say a word. He just stood in the back of the booth, staring at me with a look that wasn't pity, it was resignation. They took me downstairs to show me the intruder. Theater 4 was empty. The lights were on full bright. The floor was bone dry. There was no water damage. The seats were all in their upright, folded positions. The screen was white and blank. Must have been a hallucination, the older officer said, clicking his pen. Carbon monoxide leak, maybe? Stress? I almost believed him. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I had just snapped under the pressure of the night shift. Then we walked past the access door, the one I had kicked in to escape. The lock was shattered, just like I remembered. But that wasn't what made the blood drain from my face. In the center of the heavy steel door, punched inward from the theater side, was a dent. It was about 8 inches deep. The metal was torn and twisted, not like it had been hit with a hammer, but like it had been struck by something with immense, focused pressure. And lodged in the jagged tear of the metal was a piece of fabric, a scrap of black, rot-smelling wool. I quit via text message from the back of the ambulance. I didn't ask for my last paycheck. I blocked Dave's number. I moved 2 towns over, to a place that doesn't have a movie theater. I still have the ticket stub. I found it in my dryer filter after I washed my jeans. The date on it has changed, though. It doesn't say NOV 121999 anymore. Now, the ink is fresh. It says OCT 142025, the date of my last shift. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone who works the graveyard shift, or anyone who likes to go to the movies alone late at night. When you walk into a theater, before you sit down, look at the back row. If you see a figure sitting alone in the dark, don't assume it's a customer. Don't assume they're sleeping. And whatever you do, do not look at them long enough to see if they're breathing. Just turn around, walk out, and don't look back at the projection booth. Because now I know what that thing was doing in there. It wasn't watching the movie, it was waiting for the sequel.